My name is Betsy Peterson. I'm the director of the American Folklife Center here at the Library of Congress. And on behalf of the staff of the Folklife Center, I want to welcome all of you today to the latest installment of our Benjamin Botkin Lecture Series. And just a word about the series for those of you who do not know. The Botkin Series is an opportunity for the American Folklife Center to feature the latest scholarship, documentary work related to fields in folklore, ethnomusicology, oral history, documentary studies, cultural heritage studies. It is also recorded for eventual webcast on our website. So with that said, if you do have a cell phone or any electronic device, please make sure it's shut off, or you will be in our archive also. Today, as you can see, is something of a special edition of the Botkin Lecture Series, and today is something where we're going to be hearing a lot of rich discussion, celebrating music, all to celebrate the work of Michael Ford. And the work of Michael Ford that is in the American Folklife Center, and we're thrilled. In 2014, the American Folklife Center here at the library acquired the photographs and films of Michael Ford, documenting traditional life in northern Mississippi. And to tell you a little bit more about that, and also to tell you about the beautiful book that is coming out celebrating that work, I'm going to introduce Becky Clark, the director of the Office of Publications, and I should say the Office of Publications has worked with us to co-sponsor this event, and so we thank them very much. And I'll turn it over to Becky now.
Thank you, Betsy, and welcome to everyone here. It's really exciting to see you all in the audience for this launch of North Mississippi Homeplace by Michael Ford. My name is Becky Brasington-Clark. I have the privilege of directing the Library of Congress General Publishing Office. Our mission is to highlight the work of the library and the collections of the library by publishing books and other products that showcase the collections. It helps disseminate information far and wide. You can find our books anywhere books are sold. We meet our goal by sharing the publishing burden with commercial and nonprofit publishers that handle the design, some of the editorial work, the production, the printing, the marketing, the distribution, and sales. And in this case, we've been really fortunate to work with the University of Georgia Press, which has not only created an absolutely gorgeous book, but they've also arranged bookstore events for Michael in outstanding independent bookstores in Oxford, Jackson, and Greenwood, Mississippi, as well as Memphis, Tennessee. And Michael hit the road in another couple of weeks, and so if you're down that way, look for him there. As you may have seen, we have a representative of the library shop on hand if you haven't already purchased a book. Michael's going to be back in the corner there signing copies after the event, and we're going to be fortunate during that period to be serenaded by live blues from Mark Muleman Massey. We'll also have my favorite cake. It has the book cover on it. And coffee, tea, and soda, and I hope you'll stick around for a while just to enjoy the music, the fellowship, and the hospitality. We're also delighted to have several of Michael's photographs from the 1970s on display outside the Folklife Reading Room in G53. If you'd like to go see that display, we can show you where to go. It's only about a half-mile walk in this building, so but we'll get breadcrumbs. I'd like to extend a special and very warm welcome to residents and relatives of residents of the Mississippi Hill Country who made the long journey to be with us today. This book, along with Michael's photos and films, reflects the generosity of you and your forebears in sharing your traditions and cultures, and it's our hope that these works help preserve the memory of friends, family, places, and folkways. Thank you for being here. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. We'll start with Amy Hess, my colleague, who's the managing editor of the Library of Congress Publishing Office. During almost 16 years here at the library, Amy has written several books and edited dozens of others on topics ranging from 16th century map making to the photographers of the Farm Security Administration. Over the course of several years, Amy worked closely with Michael to organize and shape the manuscript for North Mississippi Homeplace, and her work contributed immeasurably to the narrative we are now able to enjoy in print. And Dr. Todd Harvey, to my immediate left, is a reference archivist, curator of the Alan Lomax collection, and acquisitions coordinator for the American Folklife Center. Todd holds graduate degrees in music composition from The Ohio State University and in library science from Catholic University of America. His ebook, Michigan I.O., Lomax in the 1938 Library of Congress Folk Song Expedition, was published in 2013 by the Library of Congress in association with Dust to Digital Records. And finally, Michael Ford. Michael Ford is a documentary photographer, filmmaker, author, and metal artist. Yeah. He is the proprietor of Yellow Cat Productions, an award-winning media production company based right down the street here in Washington. And in the early 1970s, Michael left a college teaching position in Boston, packed his young family into a van, and I believe there are a couple of folks who remember that pretty well.
We call them survivors.
Survival, the Michael Ford edition, and headed to rural Mississippi, where he spent the next 4 years recording everyday life through interviews, still photographs, and film. The project took him to Oxford, as well to Marshall, Panola, and Tate counties, to a remote area north of Sardis Lake. His efforts resulted in the award-winning documentary film Homeplace. In 2013, Michael returned to his adopted home place, camera in hand, only to find that most everything had changed or was gone. The photo essay that is North Mississippi Homeplace juxtaposes the rural Mississippi of the 1970s and the mid-2010s with Michael's personal reflections. This book has already drawn praise from author William Ferris, who calls it a hauntingly beautiful collection of color photographs that capture the North Mississippi world that inspired the fiction of William Faulkner, the photographs of William Eggleston, the music of Othar Turner, and the metalwork of Marion Randolph Hall. Michael Ford's keen eye documents people, their homes, and their landscape in exquisite detail, and his eloquent writing frames each image with loving care. And now, a conversation about North Mississippi Homeplace.
Hi, folks. My name's Todd Harvey. As you heard, I'm a curator at the American Folklife Center. And who knew that Michael Ford had so many friends?
I paid them to.
It's really, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I hope this is a conversation that you'll remember. I also worked with Amy on a book, as you mentioned, and I know what a close collaboration it is between an editor and an author, and the give and take and the pull, and finally, here's that moment, the celebration that we have. So this is a celebration, and congratulations to you both. American Folklife Center is a special collections division at the library, and our objective is to document expressive culture in the United States and around the world. And we have materials from just about every corner of the world in more than 500 languages. And our collections span roughly the last 130 years or so. Documentation of North Mississippi and American Folklife collections runs throughout that time period because it's a special place. It's a special part of America for whatever reason. And I certainly don't know, but I think it has to do with the light, as you've remarked in many times, the luminescence, the pearlescence of the light, and the people. So the light, the land, and the people all combine in some way to make it special. And Michael's work, beginning in the 1970s and continuing today, kind of falls into place very nicely with the other collections that we have in the American Folklife Center, beginning really in the 1930s with the work of WPA workers and kind of allied organizations like the Library of Congress at the time. Herbert Halpert was there, and the Lomaxes were there shortly thereafter, and again and again we find these characters evolving in that documentation. The characters, individuals with special takes on expressive culture through their storytelling, their song, and through their performing. And Michael's book that we're going to talk about captures that in a wonderful way, I think. And so I just wanted to set that context that Homeplace fits into the larger body of documentation of North Mississippi here at the Library of Congress and in other repositories. And we're very grateful that Michael's agreed to share that work with us and by extension with the American people. So I think, Amy, do we have some things to look at and maybe prompt Michael on a few of these photographs?
Definitely. So we thought we'd start by just talking more about the collection as a whole and the project as a whole. I just wanted to show you a series of a few photographs. These are just a few of the many in the book, which are just a fraction of what's in the collection. And as we're looking at these, I just wanted to say one of the hardest things about tackling this material for a book as an editor was just choosing what photographs to include in the book, because there were so many beautiful photographs. So I wanted to ask you, Michael, how did you go about narrowing down the photographs? I think there's over 600 in the original.
Actually, it's
even more.
Yeah, and since I got back from Germany, after telling my friend Schulze he needed to go through all his old negatives, and I found another 345 Mississippi photographs, which I think you've seen some of them. You saw some of the black and white ones that Mary and I got from the old store when we went back to do Juke.
And so there are fewer than 200 photographs in the book. So how was the process of, how did you choose?
A lot of it just has to do with, you look at a photograph and there's a story about it, and you tell that story, and that fits into another one, and inshallah, the flow builds itself. It's all right-brained, you know. I mean, it really is. There's nothing conscious. There is no decision. You can't make a decision on that. I like it. Boom. That's it. Done. Mm-hmm. Right? People ask me about taking photographs, and I say the prime thing is learning how to tell the left side of your brain to shut the hell up and let the right side of the brain do what it needs to do. You know, you see something and you go click, and then you look at it a while later and you go, oh, now I know why I took that. Mm-hmm. You've seen the photograph from Kawalak of the 5 photographs of the woman entering the mosque. I found that almost a year later, like, oh, there's a photograph. That's a nice one. I like that mosque. Oh, there's a set of shoes out in front. And then the woman peeks her head in. I stood out there for probably 5 minutes while that process took place, and I had no recollection of it. But something made me sit there and do the same frame with 5 different takes on it, and it built its own story. I discovered that story. I didn't take it, you know. Mm-hmm. That's the way it works, I think, or at least for me. Mule Man, you'd agree, right?
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, a lot of it is instinct, it sounds like, for you as an artist. But you do have a background in photography. Can you talk a little bit about the influences?
Actually, I don't.
Don't you have a BA in photography?
Well, I do have a BFA in photography from RIT, which, RIT is, of course, but I had no idea when I went there. The only reason I got in is when I applied and they asked for a portfolio. I was in the Mediterranean on a big gray thing with white numbers on the side. And I went down to the ship's library and had to look up in the dictionary what a portfolio was. And I sent them a portfolio, and I think the reason they got in is everybody had sent them pictures of their high school graduation or their football team. And I was sending them pictures of the sea and storms things like that, but, you know, we should look at some of the old Navy stuff, and I found that 4 years at RIT, while it helped and gave me a formal, it's the same photographs. I can see that I was photographing before I knew what the hell I was doing, and in a lot of ways I had to relearn not to know what I was doing. The biggest formal thing was you talked about the FSA photographers. I wound up, and again, I was taught Drawing 101 by Picasso. I had Beaumont Newhall teaching me history and aesthetics of photography. I didn't know till 20 years later that he had literally written the book, you know? And he used to pull out all the FSA photographers in the bowels of Eastman House and start telling me stories, telling the class, was about 8 of us, so it was very intimate. And we got the stories of the FSA photographers from somebody who knew them all personally. You know, you would have loved to have the recordings of that class, I know. And I got to handle the original prints. Oh, with gloves, of course, but you know. And so when I got to North Mississippi and went wandering of a late afternoon, and when it was first frost, which was salient, I knew what I was seeing, but I had no context for it. I had no, but I knew that there was I was seeing things that shouldn't exist. And so since I was also needed a thesis for BU, it all kind of worked together. And 3 months after we moved from Rochester to Boston, we moved to Mississippi. And it was wasn't it fun? Deirdre will tell you of stories of me trying to convince her cornflakes and orange juice was breakfast with no milk.
So are you saying that you learned how to take photographs in Mississippi?
Well, see, I was a film guy. I mean, I spent my life behind a lens, but it was a moving lens, and they're different. They're different. When you're shooting stills, you're waiting for this split second of, you know, Cartier-Bresson, the decisive moment, which, see, RIT was good for something. Cocktail chit-chat a lot. But Cartier-Bresson would find the decisive moment, and Lucien Agner, all the rest of those people. And you, especially if you're shooting black and white, you're shooting a representation of reality, two-dimensional. You have to find the split second when the entire scene is revealed. In film, you're shooting through time and space. I mean, you're picking somebody up over there and you're following them. You need to know where they're going before they know, so you can put a good frame around them, right? So they're different. Everything's in motion. You're following things. They're sequential. And not only that, there's a story arc and a continuity. You just don't shoot a video shot and say, okay, got it, let's go. I mean, you have to build an entire vocabulary around it. So and I never shot, you know, it's the first thing I've ever had published. You know, I've had a couple of shows that I tried out just to see what it was like to play with still photographs. I'm totally committed to still photography now. You know, I'm working on all that African stuff, and I do the Capitol Hill project. But as far as a function, I don't think like a still photographer. I don't know why I would want to be in a show. It doesn't make, I don't know. I'm not a still photographer, really, but I am. I take pictures, but I'm not a still photographer, SP.
Could you? We have a monitor here, so I'm pointing that. But really, could you talk to us a little bit about what we're seeing here? This is a new photograph, right?
This was, we were going to your house when I took this, coming up from Clarksdale, the Juke Festival. It's the land and the light. I mean, the only other place I've seen light, well, I saw some in Russia, but Holland, you know, the Dutch light, the ever famous Dutch light. And at sea, when the clarity, I mean, Lord God, the sea can just, poof. And Mississippi, there's a special quality to the light. When we drove down in 2013, Lou and Albert and I, we stopped in Bolivar. We got from Washington to Bolivar, Tennessee, wanted to enter Mississippi first light. drove across the border at Michigan City, and the first thing that popped into was that big yellow field, a mustard field. And it was like, okay, I'm back. You know, and I had two cameras sitting between me on the car seat, so my hand reached down and, you know, I was kind of doing this. And my hand closed on a still camera, and I said, okay, fine, I guess that's the way it's supposed to be. And the space, the people say, tell me about the photograph, and I say, look at it. You know? That's the space, the geometry, the way the eye travels through that, the details and the history, the Delta Earth. There's only the Delta comes in two flavors. That where you feel like an ant at the bottom of a saucer, and Sky Lake, which is the last little bit of primal Delta. You know. Mr. Hall told me, well, there's a lot of stories. There's.
Well, let's get to Mr. Hall. He's the next slide.
Okay.
Coincidentally. And I think anyone who's spoken to Michael or anyone who reads the book will get the sense that Mr. Hall was really the anchor of Michael's experience in Mississippi in the early 70s. Can you talk a little bit about how working with Mr. Hall led you to other people in the community, and also what you learned from him besides blacksmithing?
That could take a long time.
Yeah, it's a big question.
You know, sometimes, certainly in a lot of cultures, there's theories of predestination and fate. Mr. Hall said, when the angels talk to you, you better listen. And, I had been there for about a week, 2 weeks or something like that. Somebody said there's an old-timey smith down by Avens Gin, just off the square, which is, of course, now all boutiques. And, Oxford's different. And I went down and I started talking to him, and I got my first lesson in blacksmithing, which was, we were talking, and I, at that point, was still raw Yankee. And at one point he turned to me and said, young fella, would you mind picking up that piece of metal there? And I said, at that point, probably something like, yeah, sure, not a problem, as opposed to 6 months later, I'd say, yes, sir, be glad to. And as I reached down, he said, you might want to spit on it, see if it's hot. And that was my first lesson in blacksmithing. He was the kind of man, I'd be doing something, grinding or whatever I was doing. He'd say, well, Michael, I used to know a fella that did it that way. And it took me a couple of months to figure out that the proper response was, and what happened to him, Mr. Hall? Well, he put his eye out. How should I be doing this, Mr. Hall? He told me one time, Michael, it ain't that's Mykal, I think. Well, Michael, it ain't what's in a man that defines him. It's what he lets out. And if something went wrong, if something just went totally to hell, it just destroyed, where I would be using some of the descriptive language I learned from bosun mates in the U.S. Navy, he'd say, I hate that. And that was it. I never saw him stumped. And as you say, he was my entree. He was the Virgil to my Dante. I learned to sit on my heels with him and say, hi, how you getting on? How's the folks? And talk about the important things with your crops and your folks, your people. And it is, if Albert was here, Albert and I have spent a lot of time talking about the parallels between North Mississippi and Africa in terms of social construct. The families are important. It's the exchange between people that's important. Money is there, and money is important, but it has to do with so much more in those rural situations. I mean, these were the people in West Africa, Cherkafo, the people you go through initiation with. In Mississippi, it was your neighbors, the people you went to church with, who would come and help your family if your barn burned down, or if you were sick, or if you died. I never saw anything like that when I was coming up, in New Jersey. They don't do that. So yeah, he was there, and When I joined the Blacksmith Guild of the Potomac, a couple of years ago, well, 1,000 years ago, I realized there's like 200 smiths. We got 4 coal forges and 7 anvil stations. The forge is about where Mr. Hall's was. It's about 1900. We have electricity, but there's no hydraulics, there's no lasers, no nothing. And all these people were making stuff. There were people who were making their own Damascus steel, and people who were making swords and armor and cutlery and tools and, doing Civil War this. And I realized I'm a 19th century agricultural blacksmith. Everything I know is worthless. I mean, you want your middle buster to plow the earth. You don't want it skipping the earth or burying itself. It's got to be cupped about like that. Does anybody want that information? No. So we fixed things. That's all. That's what we did. So it's a totally. County would drop off a couple of dozen bush hog blades, and well, you saw in the movie there when the reunion of the strikers doing the bush hog blades. And there's a certain, in West African culture, blacksmiths are semi-priestly class because you're working with the 4 elements, air, earth, fire, and water, and you know the secrets of doing it. And Mr. Hall people treated him with respect because of what he knew. And, in Mississippi, it certainly then it was a different world. I could go anywhere in Mississippi, and they would ask me, kind of like, who are you? You're kind of a Yankee. And I'd say, well, I live across the street from Mrs. Kimmons, and I work for Mr. Hall. Boom, done. I had a place. I fit into the cultural matrix. It was great. I loved it, obviously.
And I think a lot of those connections started with Mr. Hall. If you see in this picture, it's on my right, but you can see this molasses pan
Yes.
in the foreground, and
Where are you, Sharon?
Michael helped fix
There
that.
she is. That's your granddaddy's pan sitting right there.
And
And the reason AG let me go and be part of this was because I worked for Mr. Hall. Not because I was a filmmaker or a photographer or anything, but if I worked for Mr. Hall, I had to be all right, because Mr. Hall didn't have bad people or something.
So this is a central scene in the film Homeplace, which is I don't know what is it, 27 minutes, 30 minutes, something like that.
Homeplace?
Homeplace.
Well, it seems long because it's so wonderful, but it's only 24 minutes.
24
it's
minutes.
half-hour format.
It's half-hour format.
Yeah.
And so this is a long scene. So there's obviously something that was important to you, and I wonder if you could talk about it a little bit. We're just seeing one still from it, but set the scene for us, if you would.
Well, we should tell folks there's, one of the great ironies is this book's about the making of a movie, and you don't get to see the movie, but it's out there for you to see if you want to see the movie and see what we did a 9-piece non-linear documentary that's keyed into the book that's sort of floating out in the cosmos, but we're seeing if we can get it back to Earth. But they're there. They're on they're on your
library's
website.
website.
And they're free to take a look at.
Yeah.
You can hear these people. You can see them. You can do everything. But that's if I had a bottle of what this place smelled like, I mean, Lord have mercy, tang of mule sweat, a lot of raw earth, wood smoke. Sweet smell of that sorghum juice. This is that's Calvin James sitting over there. He wound up first sergeant in the 101st Airborne and became mayor or alderman in Holly Springs. And I thought Joanne was going to show up. Oh, she is there, Joanne. Her granddaddy. He's making her granddaddy's crop. And that's her brother. Do you two folks know each other? Had you met before, Joanne? Sharon? Well, your grandfathers Your grandfathers knew each other well. You remember all of this, right? You lived this. Yeah, Joanne told me that told me when she was a little girl, she hid from Doc James hid from your granddaddy because he wanted you to go out and chop cotton, and you were not interested in chopping cotton. Anyway, what's next?
So I wanted to let Todd talk a little bit about this tradition that you captured, and where else it's represented in our collection.
Sure, I'll try to set it up for you, Michael. The fife-and-drum tradition in North Mississippi, I don't know how old it is, but I know that our first documentation of it is in about 1941 with Sid Hempel, his band playing at a picnic. And then it was documented again in our archive, I'm sure by others, by Alan Lomax, I think slightly after the time you were there. So what are we looking at here?
Well, that's kind of the back part. People in Mississippi in those days certainly kind of like lived in what I've seen in Africa and would describe as a compound, where you might have multiple houses within a property space, multiple generations. Again, the family and the interchange and the richness of that. And of course, these people were self-sufficient. I mean, that was part of their draw. Is I came from New Jersey where no one was self-sufficient. No Safeway, no Kroger's, no food. These people, they took care of themselves. And they had the skills to take care of. They knew how to live their lives without a whole bunch of outside stuff. I cleaned that up. And the interactions, from what I understand, fife and drum goes back to the militias of the 1700s. And the idea was, especially in population-limited places, the fife and drummers were African Americans or Indians because you weren't going to give them a gun. And so, as bandsmen, you weren't wasting a guy who could carry a gun beating on a drum, because you didn't have that many people who could afford to have a weapon. I mean, that was, in order to be in a militia, you had to have a very expensive firearm, and not everybody could afford that. So, and then it apparently the fife and drum migrated into what did they call them? Field marches, something like that. When I did this, by the way, I want you to know I didn't know jack about any of it. Right? Took me, I was 20 years to find out I was a participant observer in a material folk process.
Well, if you didn't know, why did you go there?
Because that's what needed to happen. That's what was there. That's see. I came out of. It seems that I've always been curious. Okay, and I came out of the Navy, where I got to see a lot of different stuff and do a lot of different things and see a lot of which I photographed because I had a camera. Then I went to RIT, and I learned a lot of context to be able to say, to know the photographers who were the. And then after that, I went and shot local news. And, you know, you go out shooting local news, it is probably a very, very difficult milieu to operate in. Because you go out and they you have an assignment to do the Christmas package jam at the mail, right? And you get there and they say, no, there's no there. Okay, we have to make a story about how there isn't a Christmas jam at the post office. So in order to, if you're doing a commercial or something like that, you get what you need, you put it in a pile and you shoot it, right? You make a storyboard or whatever you're going to do. Stuff like this, you just set your antenna out. You just, what's there. And like I say, you get this part to shut the hell up. And this part, you just go that, click, that, click, that, click. I can't tell you how many times when shooting things, especially documentaries, at some point I'd say, I got it. And they'd say, what'd you shoot? I have no idea, but I got it. And that's why there's a picture of a pig butt. There was something, you know, if I try to analyze that, I would say one, you know, these are kind of blown out, but when you see that, the light is golden. That sunrise is just, it's palpable, you can feel the light. And that tells you everything you need to know about survival in a farmstead in North Mississippi, from the doghouse to the chickens to the, you know, the ramp going up to there to keep the foxes out, and, you know, all of it. Everything you need to know about feeding yourself in North Mississippi in 1972 is in that photograph, or something like that.
So we don't have too much more time, and I want to make sure we get to the last section of the book, which is going back. So as I understand it, when you left Mississippi, it was 1975.
5, 6.
And you didn't go back again
That's
until...
Janice, by the way. She was there, and that young lady next to her was about this high. But you know, when she was in art school, people would say she was doing hot metal, and people would say, "Aren't you afraid of the hot metal?" She's like, "No, I grew up in a blacksmith shop." It's also her fault that all this is here.
That story's in the book. So you didn't go back until 2013.
Yes.
And when you did go back, immediately you made connections with
Oh,
1975.
How about an hour after we got there?
Can you tell the story on the top and then?
Well, like I say, we came out of Michigan City, came through the mustard field, which then turned into the Quadro Stagioni. And then we hit Route 4, heading south on Highway 7. And it was, oh, hell, let's go over to Chulahoma, which doesn't exist anymore. And we got over to where the store was, and there was a just big grassy thing. And I was explaining to Lou and Albert that where you just see this stoop was once a vibrant, amazing place, you know, a piece of amber that contained 19th century agrarian America, that general store.
Picture of it on the
there it is. Okay, we were looking at the one on the right, and I was trying to explain to him that it was once upon a time and one on the left. Do you have some interiors there? Can you show folks what was going on?
Not in the slideshow, but there's plenty in the book.
Okay. We noticed these. Go back to the other ones. We were setting up, and we had this camera on our shoulder, and we looked over, back up the intersection where there's a Mississippi gas station. Now, a lot of you folks may not know what Mississippi gas station means, but it does mean good fried chicken, and it means collard greens, and it means grits in the morning, and gasoline, and fuel oil, and probably some sneakers, and, you know, yeah, Mississippi gas stations are something in and of themselves. And these two gentlemen over there were looking at us. And I thought, well, you know, maybe I had that box of photographs, and I thought I'll go over there and see if they remember the store. So I went back over, and I said, do you remember the Waldrip store over there? And the Greg Shaw, the guy in the T-shirt, said, oh, yeah, they made a movie about that store. Now, there was, you know, this is you know, the layers of this thing go pretty damn deep in a lot of ways. I went back to we shot the thing in 73. And in those days, given 16 millimeter film, you couldn't shoot like video does now. You just roll and roll and roll. That doesn't matter, 400 hours, poof, who cares, as long as you wade through it. But in this film days, that's why all these stills exist, because I couldn't shoot 16 millimeter. And so you could not necessarily take the chance on just rolling on something and letting it develop, and if it turns into nothing, you kind of had to set up select rooms, that's not pronounced right. So, anyway, simulacrums, thank you, of what you perceived as reality. And so, said to Hal, well, we need to shoot something, get a sound interaction, which means we had the camera rented for one day, and we need to do something. And Roman Jones came by, and Roman was a great guy, and we said, well, Roman, why don't you come in and you buy something? And he said, what am I going to buy? Well, whatever, we'll just do it. We set the camera up on a tripod, and Roman comes in, and there's an interview. Hey, Roman, how you doing? Well, I've been all right. Where you been? I ain't seen you. Well, I've been up on the lake. And they're chatting away, and, oh, can I get you something? Oh, yeah, I want something to eat. How a piece of bologna to eat. Okay. And there's a counter and a step stool behind it, and Roman's standing there, and he kind of kicks the step stool out of the way, and Hal comes walking around. Say, what you want to drink? I'll have a Pepsi drink. He comes walking around to the cooler. Now, you have to know that Hal used to take me riding at dusk out on these ridges in North Mississippi where it's absolute silence and these starry dome, and you can hear the birds calling from ridge to ridge. It just blew me away. And he would tell me that he thought he needed to rethink. This is a white guy who was working in this general store back in the furnishing times, sharecropping times, back in the 30s during the Depression, which nobody in Mississippi noticed because, he said he needed to rethink everything he knew. So Hal's walking around, he goes to the cooler, he picks it up, and as he's heading out, we don't have wireless mics, we got a beat up old shotgun, and he's faced away from us, he says something, and he comes around, he puts the cold drink down in front of Roman. Roman pulls up the step stool and sits down. And we go ahead and we shoot the thing, we cut it into the movie, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we go back in 1975. We went back for Christmas again. Right? 75? 76. Anyway, the movie was done. And Janice and Deirdre were down with the folks. And I grabbed a projector and a sheet and went up to Chulahoma, went to the general store. We put the sheet down the center of the aisle. Half the people were watching it backwards. They didn't care. And the place just filled up. It was absolutely full. It was standing room only with Chulahoma, Gravel Springs, Laws Hill, all those places, and showed the movie. And, when people started to see those North Mississippi red roads and all that, the kudzu and everything, it started the frison. And as it went on, we got to Chulahoma, and it just picked up, the hubbub, people talking and laughing and scratching. And we get to the point where Roman pulls the stool up and sits down. The place goes nuts. It goes absolutely crazy. And well, it turns out that was the first time that a black man had been served at that counter, because when Hal Waldrip realized that his store was being caught forever, it was going to be a place where a man was welcome to sit down. He had rethought. And so we got to talking with Greg here, and he says, yeah, they brought a movie. I remember that movie. They brought us in there. I was a little boy, and, I said, that was my movie. And we got to talking. And one thing led, he was there, and I was showing him photographs, and at one point he taps the photograph and says, that's my mother. And that's the way it was ever since. You found me, right? I didn't find you. You found me. You found me. I didn't find you. Somehow the message went out, and suddenly Hal Waldrip's grandson is there, and I was surprised some Mr. Hall's folks are here. A.G. Newsom's people are here. Doc James's people are here. They found me, every single last one of them. I didn't find any of them. So yeah, that's what the return was about. It just flowed in. Wow. And the Como Public Library, we had one of my first shows. at Como Public Library. Como, home of Mississippi Fred McDowell, Othar Turner, Napoleon Strickland, Jessie Mae Hemphill,
Othar Turner here.
all those folks. Population 1,200. They did a show. Alice Parati put a show up at the public library, about 25 photographs. And I went down to do a brown bag lecture. And after babbling on for a little while, I said, any questions? And this lady raised her hand and pointed to the picture up on the wall behind her and said, where'd you get my picture? That's the way it worked. It's Othar Turner's daughter. And, you know, it just... And then, of course, I met Mule Man, and just things kept on, you know, just kept on going.
So we've got one more slide before we can take a question or two. This is the site of Mr. Hall's workshop. And
Yeah.
then the site in, I think, 2015.
Yeah, 2013, the tree was still there, which was the only way and then we came back the year later and they'd cut the trees down, and it went from that to that.
I just wanted to ask you, you know, how did it feel seeing the places that were so central to your experience were so altered or in some cases gone?
Well,
completely?
there's certainly nostalgia, but I mean, you know, if you you can't get through life much without getting nostalgic, because anything you think you knew is gone at some point. I mean, let's face it, we're not in Eisenhower's America anymore.
Thank goodness.
You could be nostalgic for that. It's inevitable. I mean, my own neighborhood right down the street, you know, I'm getting 1,000 condos within a 4-block radius of me. Even where I live is no longer what it was a few short years ago. I guess I suppose ultimately I'd have to say I was lucky to get it while it was there, and to be able to come away with something that seems to have some value for other people. But I had no idea what I was doing at the time. I was just doing what was in front of me. And the fact that it turned into something that has perhaps captured a time and place is, that's just lagniappe.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
Would you like to take questions, or would you like a piece of cake first?
Say again?
Would you like questions or cake?
I'll take questions if anybody, you know.
Questions it is.
Kate, that's my cousin back there.
Could you tell me if,
Yeah,
do they
please.
still make the molasses in those giant, where they cast iron?
No,
That's long gone.
no, it looks more like a New England maple syrup thing, you know, probably gas jets, permanent evaporator pan. You're not going to see a mule.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
Yeah.
He was in the ground, the man who was making the molasses or whatever process that was, it looks like he was in a hole himself.
Oh, yeah. Sure, because you didn't have to bend over.
Oh,
You know, standing over that pan, as he said. That's what he would say. Well, you remember him saying, did he talk to you about making molasses and all that? He was a storyteller. You know, I will. I got me and James and Judge Dean, Doc James, A.G. Newsom, a couple of other gentlemen sitting around. And these old gentlemen, they were very relaxed. And they got to telling stories. And there was a lot of ho, 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 ho going on. And because you are a direct descendant, I will give you access to what he doesn't have, some of the stories that they were telling, simply because, you know, some things remain among gentlemen. But the good stories.
Is there any other questions?
What will you be doing, what will you be doing with the information that you've gotten from Africa?
Well, I was just, matter of fact, when you were talking, a couple of things
We're taking,
came, you know,
it will be here.
you got to figure out what you're going to do for an encore, right? And Katie, I got something that we might want to do that's also, I mean, you were talking about different cultures. I've tried to pawn off the Russian trip to you a number of times.
That's a little hot right now.
No, it isn't, because you would never, no one has ever seen Russia the way we saw Russia, traveling in a 35-foot sailboat from St. Petersburg to Moscow, first day of school at Czechoslovakia, newspaper in Cherry-Poverts, a steel mill, Russian. We got a guided tour of a Russian missile corvette by the captain, who and I was a gunner's mate, right? I know what he's doing. He's pulling back the security things and showing me his fire control stuff, and I'm photographing it. We went to the nuclear research facility at, what the hell's the name of it? Guavno? No, Guavno is shit. Excuse me.
Yeah, we'll talk to
It's something like that.
talk to the boss about it.
Anyway.
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, anyway, Katie, maybe we'll go make a Russian currents.
I mean, the short answer is that Michael's been productive throughout his career since the 1970s, and I think that we probably have 10 or 15,000 other photographs from other work, as well as several films.
There's 8,000 photographs from Capitol Hill, and there's 10,000 photographs from West Africa, and I'm still working on that. This gentleman over here and I are planning to go back with a bunch of professional jewelers and interact with Senegalese jewelers. He taught me how to make this. That's Nick there. Silversmith extraordinaire.
So I think it would be great to invite Muleman back up on stage, and everyone, thank you so much for coming.
Are we going to get off? Get on off?
Yeah. And after we listen to a couple of songs, please feel free to mingle and have cake. There's books for sale in the anteroom, and Michael will be signing books in the back corner. So please stick around.
So now it's a party.
Yeah, now it's a party.
Oh, good.
Yay.
Isn't that amazing, Mr. Ford? Woo! Lord have mercy. Just a little quick something on me. 19 years old behind the parchment prison walls, and to ever think when I was singing in a prison band that I could ever be right here. It is just a dream come true. And Mr. Ford for doing what he did for me. So I'll do you a couple of songs down in Mississippi style, if that's all right. And I've topped the sorghum, and I've stripped sorghum, and I remember taking our juice over to the man's house and him cooking it all for us, and we had homemade sausage that morning, and my grandma made homemade biscuits before we left, but we didn't have no syrup, So when the first batch come off good and hot, we took a break. I was the one riding the mule. I kept him going around in circles, and Grandma was feeding that meal. She was just putting that cane in there and letting that juice come on out, and when the first batch come off, which probably would have been about 9 o'clock in the morning, we got there early. Then we stopped, and she broke out them homemade biscuits from earlier, and we went to sopping that doggone sorghum. And so it's just Mississippi. I'm definitely part of Mississippi, and I'm so glad to be here. But I'm just like a rabbit, ain't got no den. Girl, I'm just like a rabbit, girl, I ain't got no den. Lord, if you get on mule, you'll be back loving again. Well, now tell me, little baby girl, where did you spend last night? Tell me now, baby Lord, where did you spend last night? I got a real good feeling, girl, you ain't treating no mule right. Girl, I'm just like a rabbit, I ain't got no den. Little girl, just like a rabbit, baby, ain't got no den. If you come and love me, girl, I'll be back again. I gotta ask you one more time, girl, where did you spend last night? Tell me, pretty baby girl, where did you spend last night? 'Cause I don't think, Lord, you're treating you, man, right. Bring me your loving home. Oh, now, pretty girl, won't you bring your loving back home? I'm so lonely, girl, I'm sleeping all alone. 'Cause I'm just like a rabbit, girl, I ain't got no den. You got me just like a rabbit, girl, I ain't got no den. But if you ever have my loving, girl, you'll be back again. Thank you, thank you. When we're down in the hill country of Mississippi, I was fortunate enough to, when I was on that little stay in Parchment Farm, to get to meet Junior Kimbrough's son, Mr. David Kimbrough. And when I got out in '93, I was able to go up to Holly Springs to a juke joint in Chulahoma. And then, like Mr. Ford said, a lot of things was lost. And but I tell you what, it was just an amazing experience when I come up to the juke and you could just hear Mr. R.L. Burnside do something like this. Called Going Down South. Going down south, I'm going down south. Going down south, I'm going down south. Going down south with a chilly wind don't blow. Going with you, babe, I'm going with you, babe. Going with you, babe, Lord, I'm going with you, babe. Going with you, honey, Lord, and I don't care where we go. No, I don't. See, fellas, I heard her feet when they hit that Tallahatchie Bridge. She just kept on running. So I yelled down her to her through that cornfield bottom. I said, baby, where you going? Fellas, she never quit running. She just kind of leaned her head back and kept running, and she yelled back to me. She said, I'm going down south, I'm going down south. Going down south, Lord, I'm going down south. Going down south, Lord, and I don't care where we go. I couldn't let her leave without me. I said, I'm going with you, babe. I'm going with you, babe. Going with you, babe, Lord, I'm going with you, babe. Going with you, honey, and I don't care where we go. But I gotta ask you something, honey. I know you ain't cheating on me. But can I ask you one question? Some black man, some black man. Some black man, Lord, there's some black man. Some black man, baby, and is always hanging around. Uh-oh. I'd rather be dead, I'd rather be dead. Rather be dead, Lord, I'd rather be dead. Rather be dead, honey, now 6 feet in the ground. Going, people. I'm going, and I don't care where we go. Thank you so very much. Is that it? Thank you so very much. One that I heard in the club also was a little song called Baby, How Long? So how long? Baby, how long? Girl, has that midnight train been gone? Little girl, how long? Baby, how long? Little girl, how long? See, fellas, I woke up this morning. It sure looked like rain, Lord, deep down in my heart. I got an aching pain. Baby, how long? Little girl, how long? Baby, how long? You know what, fellas? When I'm dead and old mule man's deep in my grave, Lord, there won't be no more of them D.C. women for me to crave. Baby, how long? Little girl, how long? Y'all can sing it with me. Little girl, how long? Let me tell you one more thing. Ain't this bad? A $10 bill looks like a window shade to me. Baby, a $100 bill, old mule man ain't never seen. Baby, how long? Little girl, how long? Little girl, how long? Little girl, if I could holler like a mountain jag. That's one of the mountain lions, you know. Girl, you know how I climb a mountain. And I would try to call you back. Baby, how long? Baby, how long? Little girl, how long? So, baby, how long? Baby, how long? Girl, has that midnight train been gone? Little girl, how long? Baby, how long? Baby, how long? I know you don't love me, woman, but I need you, honey. Come on home.